Hey, good afternoon. This is Josh from ShipStation, and we wanted to take some time today to talk a little bit about a new partnership that we've launched, and then just really what the team over at ShipBob is great at. So, just to introduce myself, my name is Josh Burdick. I manage the solutions architecture team here at ShipStation. I've been at ShipStation for about a year and a half, and then I've been in the e-commerce field for about a decade. And I just really love it because just kind of throughout that whole 10 years, I've gotten a chance to work with all sorts of merchants, work with all sorts of partners, and just really help people to figure out how to compete in a multi-channel world. How to tell that story in a really great way that resonates with the consumer. Um, I would say really my favorite part, that is my favorite part of working in this field is, I get a chance to work with some really cool merchants, and every now and then you find a really cool partner. I think that that's what I'm really excited about is a few months ago, towards the beginning of the year, I was introduced to what ended up becoming a really great partner in the team over at ShipBob. ShipBob is a really interesting company. We have at our DNA, we're just very similar. We've got very similar founding stories, and at our cores, we're both really software companies that are focused on helping e-commerce merchants to succeed. We just we're both really going in there trying to level the field so that those smaller merchants and those emerging merchants can really compete with some of the larger dominant forces out there in e-commerce. Um, Today with me, I have Jivko Bozhinov. Jivko is the head of strategic projects over at ShipBob, and we really do share that same passion, just about working with merchants to give them, all the advantages that we can to try to help them succeed, try to help them grow, try to help them compete with some of these larger, more dominant retailers, and just really help people build a great brand. With that, I will hand it over to Jivko and just kind of let him introduce himself and let him introduce his company.
Hey Josh, thank you for the kind introduction. And thank you all for joining us. Really excited to spend the next hour here with you all and geek out a little bit about fulfillment and logistics. It's our passion. It's what drives e-commerce forward. So really excited to spend this time with you. The way we're going to do it is we're going to go through kind of the main points to cover, and then we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to type in questions as we go along, and then we'll try to get to all of them at the end of it as time allows. So great, with that, let's get us started. So what will we cover today? Our agenda is going to look at how to know when you're ready to outsource fulfillment and how to know when you are not. Then we'll dive into the benefits of outsourcing your fulfillment. And lastly, we'll dig into how to choose the right third-party logistics provider, 3PL, for your business. Let's get us started. Great. So as we look at when does it make sense for you to outsource fulfillment? It varies differently for the business model that you have or the strategy that you're trying to employ. But here are just some general trade points where it probably makes sense for you to outsource fulfillment. So how much of this sounds familiar? I spend more than an hour a day packaging boxes and shipping orders. If you're in this phase where you're spending an hour of your time a day dedicated to operations, it probably makes sense for you to explore to outsource fulfillment. Your time is really valuable, especially as a founder starting out your company. And if you're spending an hour or more a day, then you should definitely consider outsourcing some of these functions or getting some additional help. I ship over 100 orders per month, so it's hard to have a tangible number for every single business, but usually at 100 orders or greater per month, there is efficiencies of scale or outsourcing these orders that you can gain some cost savings from outsourcing your fulfillment. I'm running out of space to store my inventory. So this is one of my favorite. When we first, so ShipBob has facilities all over the country, but when we expanded to New York, we met some really cool entrepreneurs that were really hustling. And one of them, before they joined the ShipBob, the gentleman was storing his product literally underneath his bed. Like the boxes of inventory he had were propping up his bed, and that was a great amount of hustle. But there was a point where he ran out of space, and that's probably a time to consider to look to get additional help to outsource fulfillment. I need more time for strategic projects like marketing and product development. I think most entrepreneurs, the things that get us excited about building a company and building a brand are things on the creative side and the growth side. And if you find yourself spending time on functions that are more to maintain the business that you've created versus grow the business, you should be thinking about outsourcing fulfillment. I'm selling on e-commerce platforms such as Shopify or BigCommerce. We point these out because they differ a little bit from platforms like eBay or Etsy. But if you're building a brand on a Shopify, BigCommerce solution, you're creating a product and a brand that will scale. That differs a little bit if you're selling, for example, on Etsy, where products are more custom and made to order. So if your site is structured on an e-commerce platform like such, you're more properly aligned with a third-party provider to be able to scale. So these are some of the pieces that are probably in the earlier founding stages of your business. I think there's a later stage where you might have already created some of your operations or have a piece of that in place, but you reach a point where you've either outgrown that facility and you're thinking about now a second facility, or you've outgrown the staff that you have or the distribution network, and you're faced with a decision: do I build it or do I buy that service? And if you've reached that stage of looking to add a second facility, you should look at outsourcing fulfillment, as there are great efficiencies you can gain from somebody's already established network. And lastly, if you're thinking my customers need quick delivery times and I can't provide it cost effectively, you should look at outsourcing fulfillment as a network that a 3PL has created, can have your products sitting closer to your end customer, which will allow you to reduce both your time in transit as well as your cost. So these are some of, I think, the signs or things that come up and that are probably you should be thinking about outsourcing fulfillment or at least evaluating those options. So let's look at some of the things of how to know that you're not ready to outsource fulfillment. So one of the first signs, or one of the first thing that's when you're looking to outsource is in those early stages of when you're coming up with your company and brand, if you're not quite at the point where you have product yet, or you've established an e-commerce site, you probably should not be going too deep into exploring the 3PL options. I think it's very valuable as a founder to get that first initial touch of your product, understand that process, and own that experience, at least in the launch of it. I think there's benefits to one, just understanding the process, as well as being able to personally craft it in a way that scales with your business. On the flip side, if you're planning to invest a lot of marketing dollars very quickly as you start your site, and this is maybe your third, fourth business that you're creating, and you know the scale of it, then that is still a stage where you could probably explore the fulfillment. Another sign is you need to keep complete control of your packaging. And for example, if this is a competitive advantage to your business, if part of an example we have here is if you have handwritten letters or very personalized notes that make your product unique and stand out, this is going to be something that's really difficult for a third-party provider to replicate for you, or it'll be extremely costly for them to do, and it's probably a sign that you're not in a position to outsource fulfillment. As well as if you have products that are made to order. So if you have made to order units, you could explore a dropship model where you're essentially the producer fulfills the order. or like if you're selling on Etsy and you have custom units where you're engraving or doing things of that nature to the product to make it unique, it's going to be really difficult for a fulfillment provider to provide a cost-effective solution to do that at scale. So on that note, there's some things that you could explore to standardize. For example, if a handwritten letter can be supplemented with the message being printed, you could explore outsourcing that piece, or the drop shipping model if you have for made-to-order items. And lastly, if you look forward to packaging and shipping and operations is your expertise and competitive advantage, you should definitely keep that in-house. So founding ShipBob, I did a lot of packaging early on in our founding days, and I personally enjoy it. I find it very therapeutic, but I understand that that's not the case for all business owners. But if the operations is your competitive advantage and you've created something unique, it's going to be difficult to put that onto a third-party logistics provider to be able to replicate for you, and it's probably something that you should be owning in-house. Great, so we've covered some of the signs of what the checkpoints of outsourcing fulfillment and when you're not ready to do so. Let's dive into some of the benefits of outsourcing your fulfillment. Cool, so I love packaging and shipping, but I think for the general portion of entrepreneurs, this is not your favorite part of the business. So one of the benefits is you simply do not need to deal with managing boxes, inventory, packing supplies, going to the post office, standing in line at the post office. You can outsource this piece and focus your time on parts of the business that are meant to grow the business instead of maintain the business. And more along that note, as you free up your time, you can focus on the growth of the business. If your time in the early days, I think your time is most valuable out of all the times because it's so crucial, and you typically have one or a few people starting out a brand, and that time is even more finite than when you go to scale and you have and you can delegate responsibilities and get to that stage. So make sure you're valuing your time. And the benefit of outsourcing it is that you're handing that off to somebody else. So play that into your cost equation when you're thinking of, is this worth my while to hand over, or am I ready to do so or not? Great, so let's say you've been pushing heavy on marketing, or you have a great big campaign coming out. You're about to display your product on Good Morning America, or you filmed on Shark Tank and you're about to go live, and all of a sudden your order volume is going to increase tremendously. It's going 50x what you're normally doing. In that moment, what do you want to think about? Do you want to think about can I get to that like 10,001 and 11,000 order, or do you want to be thinking about how do I get these orders to my customer? A part of outsourcing your fulfillment to a third-party logistics provider is that it's built to scale, meaning that if your business goes from 100 orders to 1,000 orders a day, the infrastructure is already there to that seamlessly. Whereas if you were starting out and you were processing 10 orders to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000, there is a vast amount of complexity that comes with each one of those stages. Initially, you'll probably need to hire an extra person to help you get those shipments out the door. And also, then there needs to be a team to do that. And then that team needs a manager. And then they will need to have a bigger facility and items. And all those things are barriers that slow you down into scaling your business. I think that one of the greatest benefits of outsourcing fulfillment is that you can simply step on the gas pedal and focus on growing your brand. Cool. More along that note, a great benefit is that you simply reduce complexity. As you deal with greater volume of orders, the complexity to get those orders out the door increases. As you have more staff, that complexity increases. And if you're doing 1,000 orders or greater a day, you don't want to be concerned, is my staff going to show up to work tomorrow if we have a big spike? And those are not things that you have to worry about if you've outsourced it. Essentially, you reduce your complexity with a third-party logistics provider to simply working with a single point of contact. Most companies will have a direct account manager or a rep that deals with your account, or you'll have a central dashboard where you can have the source of truth for your business in one central place, and there's less touch points needed for you to get things done regardless of scale. Cool. Another great benefit of utilizing a third-party logistics provider is that you can take advantage of their volume, expertise, and geo-footprint. So in terms of volume, the way fulfillment centers and logistics providers are structured is they're working with you and dozens and hundreds of other different businesses. And as a whole, that logistics provider ships a much greater volume of shipments than you will do so yourself. And the result they have a greater buying power, negotiating power with carriers, and they're able to get efficiencies from that volume in terms of the rates, and thus typically pass it on to yourselves and customers. And you could leverage that from them. Furthermore, the geo footprint, I think, is really important. As you have facilities in that are located closer to the end customer, and you have multiple facilities, you're going to be able to deliver your products quicker, as well as get there in a more cost-effective manner. Great. So those are some of the, I think, key benefits of outsourcing fulfillment and things, the levers that you can really pull to help your business grow. We're going to dive into how to choose the right third-party logistics provider for your business. And the first thing that comes to mind is cost. So when a 3PL is thinking about cost, typically you'll need to have an input based on your business so that you can get accurate pricing of what it would cost to have your logistics taken care of. And you want to, on your end, compute that either like, ideally you want it per order basis, but you want to see what that comes out like per month in your entire business. So these are some of the things that would be really helpful to have ready on your end to provide a 3PL, so then in return, you can get accurate pricing on what it would cost to service your business. So 3PLs typically think about pricing in these 4 fields. The first is storage. And this is simply how much space is your product gonna take in that facility. It could be varied by bins and pallets, or simply by cubic volume. So what's helpful to know is how many SKUs and how much of each SKU you'll have on hand. The second thing that you want to be ready to provide is roughly how many, is on the fulfillment side, is how many orders you're doing on a monthly, on a daily basis, and what those orders look like. I think this is a really important piece in terms of how many units are per order. Furthermore, if there's any additional kind of complexity with those orders, the less units typically that are in an order, the more optimization and cost-effective sense 3PL can provide in return. The third piece is receiving. So how many units do you plan to send in monthly? This is kind of like a cost equation, and then on your end between storage and replenishment, but it's helpful to understand how often you plan to replenish inventory and roughly how many units you plan to do so. And lastly, if your products have, or your business has any special processing needs, specifically if your products needs are in terms of kitting, or if you need serial scans where you need to know exactly which product went to each order and each customer, things like lot management, be ready to provide these things upfront just so that you could get accurate information on it, and not be a surprise after or towards the later stages of determining your choice. So this is the stuff that ideally you have ready to provide a 3PL, so in return you can get a cost decision. So when you get a pricing quote from a 3PL, we're going to dive into the different line items and things that will come back, so that I want for us to make sure that we completely understand the total cost of fulfillment. So the first line item that a 3PL typically looks at is shipping and postage fees. This is simply the fee that's going to the carrier to fulfill that product from the origin to the destination location. That's usually pretty straightforward and easy. The second piece that you'll get back is typically a pick and pack fee schedule. So these vary quite a bit from provider to provider. At ShipBob, it's we have a very transparent and simpler structure, but the traditional provider would give you per line item per pick and pack fees. Sometimes there's fees for like if you have certain size boxes, or if you have to use a box versus, for example, a poly mailer. But in general, these will break down into pick fees for the first unit and each additional unit after that. Typically, the first unit is more expensive to pick, and then each additional unit is a nominal fee. Some of them might break it down into if you're picking two of the same unit versus two different units, but make sure that you understand how those differ and how that applies specifically with your product mix and your order combination. The next items you have is storage fees. So when you're exploring storage fees with 3PLs, typically they're in different storage location quantities. So there will be a different fee for a pallet location, a bin location, shelf locations, whatever it might be. What you want to explore and make sure you understand from that provider is how that's built. For example, do you book a certain space in that facility? For example, if you start out with 40 pallets, do you have to make sure you pay for those 40 pallets all the time, regardless if you fluctuate up or down? Or how the timing is charged. For example, if your pallets come in the middle of the month, are you charged for the full month, or are you charged just for those last 2 weeks? Or the opposite, if you had a full pallet of product in the beginning of the month and that pallet expired halfway through the month, are you charged for those 2 weeks, or are you charged for the full month? So make sure that those pieces are clearly defined and understood from the storage. The receiving piece. So receiving fees are typically broken into either a per hour fee or per unit fee, and that per unit fee could be physically per each individual unit, or it could be per carton or pallet. And they vary quite a bit, but just you want to understand how that is calculated so that you could plug it into your cost equation of when you're replenishing inventory. And lastly, special handling and kitting fees. So 3PLs are structured to pick, pack, and ship orders. They'll also typically provide a service to do any type of out-of-the-box work. At least I think most of the better 3PLs do. So essentially, if you might be in a bunch and all of a sudden something happened with the product that was not expected, you want to understand, if you're in such a situation, can the 3PL handle it? And if so, what does that look like? So for example, if the packaging didn't come properly and all of a sudden you have to rebag the items, what would that cost to rebag those items? What is the per unit fee? If you have to do serial scans, what is it for that processing? Or if you're handling hazmat items, and hazmat is a pretty large term, but if you're shipping product that has lithium-ion batteries, or on the other end, if you have items that have alcohol or things in a compressed canister, they would apply in hazmat. How does that differ from any type of picking, packing fees and such? Cool. So if you have a graph of this, you should have a pretty good understanding of what your total fulfillment cost will look like. So let's keep going. So we're going to look at when we're thinking about what kind of 3PL is right for my business. We're going to take this comparison between a traditional 3PL versus a modern 3PL. So what is a traditional 3PL? So if you think about the way the industry started, is that 3PLs were originally there to help businesses essentially move product to retail locations. So if you were a Nordstrom's, or if you were sending product to Nordstrom's, you might have a 3PL provider warehouse your product and then replenish it to the retail locations of Urban Outfitters, Nordstrom, Best Buy, whoever it might be. But that 3PL is traditionally structured to move products in pallets and larger unit quantities. They're meant kind of what now is like the B2B business, and that's the way their infrastructure was built. So typically these providers are significantly outside of city areas where you have very cheap real estate, that you're near a highway, you have large, inexpensive facilities. You're meant to store product long term and to move things in bulk. The way that differs from a modern 3PL is that modern 3PL was built specifically for e-commerce. So e-commerce changed things significantly, as you all know, but essentially the way that changed for the 3PL provider is now the 3PLs had to think about how do we, when we ship 1,000 units, how do we make sure that that's efficient to go in 1,000 different boxes instead of one big box? So the process paths to pick 1,000 separate orders and have it go to 1,000 different end users is significantly different than having that in a B2B space where you simply assemble a pallet and you're moving that via freight shipment to the end customer. So a modern 3PL typically has more automation and better technology suited specifically for the e-commerce world. And the traditional 3PL would have probably slightly better efficiencies towards B2B. And then there's companies that have a mix of both, like ShipBob. Great. So look at two different terms here, warehouse versus a fulfillment center. So most times people interchange these, but they're very, very different. And the way we here in the logistics world think about it, when you talk about a warehousing solution, typically a warehouse exists to store product and to conduct activities like cross-docking or wholesale prep. What cross-docking is simply you're, for example, unloading a 53-foot truck, and you're like moving some of those pallets onto different trucks so that they can go into the distribution network. But this is what a warehouse is typically meant to do. These are very large buildings, again, in the middle of, they're in very cheap real estate and next to highways. A fulfillment center is specifically what we just discussed about what a modern 3PL is structured to do. There it exists to get orders to customers in a timely fashion and do so in very quick intervals. They're meant for high peak velocities of having dense areas where an individual can go and pick orders individually. Their services include things like kitting, labeling shipments in a different manner, and then managing returns is probably one of the big differences for a fulfillment center. Yeah. Great. So another piece that you'd like to evaluate when you're looking at your 3PL provider and outsourcing your fulfillment is the technology. So you're lucky that with ShipStation, you get really beautiful technology. And you can manage and do a lot of your work directly in one place. So what you want to think about is how does your 3PL connect to e-commerce store or to ShipStation in order to ensure that that data interchange is very seamless, specifically in the way, obviously, orders are pulling in and orders are and the tracking is being uploaded, you want to make sure that it's as real time as possible, as quick as possible. Typically, depending on technology, that has a variance of when those orders are ingested or when there's a cutoff time. From your end, you want to have the quickest as possible. So just weigh those out. If somebody, for example, you have a cutoff time of noon versus 2 p.m., how does that affect your orders? Another piece of technology to consider is the mapping of your ship options and how that integrates with your 3PL. If you're offering, for example, overnight shipping, how does that actually work when the label is being printed? Is the technology there to seamlessly map it and to ensure that the label that prints is an overnight label and the customer does get their shipment the next day when they've paid extra for it? We like to explore the way orders, inventory, and returns are managed. So I'm going to dig into a little bit about the returns piece. I think it's really very relevant for us here. So different 3PLs have different out-of-the-box like technology stacks that allow for returns. Some allow you to process, some will allow to have your returns processed in a fashion that maybe suits your business better than others. Specifically, if you're in the like cosmetics or apparel industry versus if you're in electronics or like media, print material. The reason for that is you want to make sure that if, for example, if you're in apparel, when that item comes back, what is the inspection service of those items and how that's reported to you from the 3PL. And from your end, you want to make a decision, can that item be restocked? Can I reship it? Do I discard it? How does that all work? And typically, they're just in the industry right now, very different like technology stacks that help you do that. But I think it's an important piece to explore. Some other pieces is bundling products and mapping inventory. So you could do that very well with ShipStation. So you want to make sure how does that link up to your 3PL to make sure that orders are flowing seamlessly, and especially if you have some of the mappings or things that are not native to the e-commerce platform that you have built your store on. And lastly, based on all these things, how does that technology help you leverage your data to make better decisions of when to restock your product, where to send that product, and potentially which products for you to be pushing more than others. Cool. I think another important decision is location. So when we look at the way e-commerce has changed from the days of eBay to the customer expectations now on Amazon. Back in the day when you purchased something on eBay, your moment of joy was when you got your tracking number. I bought something, that seller fulfilled it, I got my tracking number. Now my expectations are met because I know it's on the way and I'm happy if it gets here in 5 days or so. Those expectations are really different now from consumers. What Amazon has done is created this notion of free 2-day shipping, and people are expecting to get their products in 2 days, and more expecting to get those products for free, even when they're shopping on your branded site, which makes it really difficult for an upcoming company to be able to provide that when overnight and 2-day air services are so expensive. And the way to combat that is essentially to use a provider that has facilities that are closer to your end customer, because in that note, you should be able to deliver products quicker to them, more cost affordably by using ground methods instead of having to overnight things and get things 2-day air delivered to them. So here, let's look at an example of how that location plays out. So on the left, we have a map with a fulfillment center one fulfillment center that's in Los Angeles. And what you see here is the zone map from USPS, and the dark green is zone 1, the dark red is zone 8. And what you could see with one facility on the West Coast, half of your orders probably are going to be in zone 7 or 8. That means that if you're shipping shipments that are over a pound, zone 7 and 8 are significantly more expensive than your closer zones. And for all shipments, the transit time is significantly greater than the closer zones. If you utilize 3 facilities that are strategically located, you'll see this example on the right. What you'll notice is that virtually all shipments arrive in zone 5 or lower. Zone 5 is kind of that tipping point of when shipments are there with 3 days and under, and also the tipping point of where the costs start to really spike up. And you're able to achieve, with 3 fulfillment centers, you can achieve great coverage. Even with 2 facilities that are strategically located, you can cover the entire United States in a cost-effective and timely manner as well. Cool. So we talked about customer expectations and how do you get to that standard of 2-day shipping. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the way. So right now, customers' expectations are to receive their shipments in 2 days and get them at a low cost or even free. But those expectations are changing. The way we see the e-commerce space evolving is that in the next 2 to 3 years, more people are going to expect next day delivery to be that standard of fulfillment, and they will expect next day delivery to be free or very low cost. And even further out, when you would get to 4 to 5 years out, if you're in a major metropolitan area, your expectations for same-day delivery will be that that's the standard of shipping. And it might even change. Like right now, when we talk about same-day delivery, we're thinking of I order something, let's say before 4, and it gets there before midnight. But majority of e-commerce shopping happens at night, and the way that these same-day delivery carriers are changing the network is that they're going to start shifting to having their processes work in the middle of the night. So if you order something by 8 p.m. tonight, you get it by tomorrow morning. And that is essentially where the logistics industry is going towards. So when you're thinking about these expectations and you're thinking about the growth of your business over the next 3-5 years as you move on and grow your brand, you like to consider how does a third-party provider help you get closer to that or come or work with that. At ShipBob, we're able to do that through a network of providers, and you want to explore how these options can help you achieve the customer expectations as well as decrease your transit time and cost. Cool. Real quick, we're gonna go through just some other things to consider that are maybe more unique to your business, or maybe make your business differ a little bit more than the traditional e-commerce site. But when you're talking to 3PLs, make sure you discuss your international shipping. Do you have a large customer base in Europe, Asia, or Australia, or Canada? How are the service options they offer for those deliveries available? What does that look like? What the customer support looks like. So essentially, we talked about that simplicity piece. You want to make sure that you have one central place, that source of truth, or a person that you talk to, or a tech that you trust, so that you can manage your entire business. Make sure that you understand how that's done at the 3PL. If your business is structured towards subscription boxes, crowdfunding, if you do a lot of FBA prep or B2B in wholesale, typically these are different process paths that a 3PL manages, and they have different efficiencies for these lines of business. So understand how that plays with the way your business is growing. Another consideration is the custom branded boxes or packaging. So not all providers allow you to use custom packaging, and specifically degree of it. Ensure that if this is something that's of value to your business, that it's something that's supported and can be scaled. Freight shipping assistance. This is really useful for your B2B and wholesale. But if you have a 3PL provider, you want to make sure that they can also handle this volume as you grow, because dealing with freight is a different headache that you do not want to have on yourself, but you'd like to have one central place to manage it, so that you can take more advantage of the benefit of scale and simplicity. With term processing, we dive quite a bit into that, but make sure that this is something that you communicate early on into your exploration with a third-party logistics provider, to make sure that they can meet the standards of your products and can scale with you. As we're getting into Q4, another consideration is the length of the onboarding. A typical 3PL, like when we talk about the traditional 3PLs, their onboarding process time could take like 3 months or longer. A modern 3PL should be able to help you do that significantly quicker. At ShipBob, we're able to get that done in a day. So make sure that you simply understand what that timeline looks like. As you're launching new product, as Q4 is coming around the corner, you want to make sure that you're in a place and have planned these things out well in advance. Lastly, refrigeration, temperature control. If you're dealing with obviously food and chocolate and sensitive things like that, explore the refrigeration capabilities. But temperature control, don't really consider this, but if you have a 3PL, for example, in Texas or in Arizona, some of those facilities can get extremely hot during the summer. Like inside the facility, the temperatures can reach like 110 and greater degrees. Make sure that you're choosing a provider that at least has a control that meets your standards. Like if products needs to be kept under, for example, 90 degrees or 82 degrees, whatever it might be, that it's there. Great. So just to recap, outsourcing fulfillment has benefits. We talked about the right times to think about when to do so, and the times where it is not, probably not quite there yet. So fulfillment is there to help you scale, but that balance point of when it's right is kind of a soft point. We talked about if you're spending more than an hour, or if you have more than 100 orders a day, it's probably the right time to consider outsourcing. We talked about the difference between modern 3PLs and how they can help you compete against some of the retail giants with expectations through Amazon, as well as the technology that you should probably look at when considering 3PL. And with that, I'll hand it over back to Josh, and let's dive into some of the questions that we have had come through.
All right, great. Yeah, hey, thank you a lot. That was really, really great, really interesting stuff, Jivko. So yeah, we've gotten quite a few questions roll in. So let's just jump right into them. So the first question that we've got is a lot of our orders include gift notes that we send on company specific note cards. Does this work in a 3PL model? And I know that we covered that during the presentation, but really the meat of this question is, since it's not, how do I self-fulfill some orders and outsource to a 3PL for other orders?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think there's a couple of different scalable solutions. I know that the way that we handle orders, we allow users to essentially be able to mark certain items as digital or fulfilled from a different party. So this is essentially goes down to the technology in play to be able to route those different units. And there are providers that can help meet those standards. Also, if I mean, it depends on what those gift notes are. Typically, a 3PL prints a packing slip. So if you could structure it in a way that that note is printed on the packing slip, that is maybe a way to save that headache. But yeah, I think that is the two ways to think about it. But there's definitely solutions out there available that can help scale that business.
Okay, perfect. And then, one quick question that we just got in. Mick, you asked if you would receive a copy of this presentation after. Yes, you will. We will shoot out the entire audio and slides as soon as we're done with this. So just sit tight, and we'll get it out to everybody. All right. So during the presentation, Jivko, you had mentioned, something that causes the need for just like massive rapid scaling. So whether that's a Shark Tank appearance, or just a great marketing launch, Good Morning America endorses me, something like that. Um, how much lead time should I, as a merchant, have to really get set up with a 3PL, get the technology in place, get the products in place, and start rolling before I have that Good Morning America appearance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, I mean, from the logistics standpoint, you wanna do that as early as possible. So not only do you wanna be prepared in time to be able to be ready like when that episode airs or that push is live, but you would want to have tested it beforehand, and probably you would want to run through it for a week of technology, and so that you're comfortable with that provider. Um, so understanding that onboarding time is really important. Like with ShipBob, we have your technology onboard and you're all set up within a day. So then it's a matter of getting your product to us. So then that's your lead time from the manufacturer to us. And then once the inventory hits within 5 days, you're up and running, and that's sufficient time. So if you're like, let's say you were located in Chicago and you were giving inventory to ShipBob in Chicago, you can essentially have all that done within 5 days. But as you're planning this out, if you have a massive marketing push, I would strongly recommend to go even further out to
Sure.
ensure that you're running up for at least 1 or 2 weeks, and you've truly tested all the bundles and all the little nitty-gritty things that might be unique to that business before you have that big push. A great
Okay.
question.
Yeah, no, great question. Great information. Thank you, Jivko. So another really interesting question that really kind of piqued my interest. So if I'm a merchant with a low average order value, so if we look at e-commerce as a whole, average order value right now is right around $83 in the States. But let's say that I'm half that. Let's say that I'm in the 40s for my average order value. But I do pretty significant volume. I do 1,000 orders a month, 1,500 orders a month, something like that. How do I find ROI when I'm high volume but low order value?
Yeah, so obviously the lower your order value goes, the more you want to figure out to be cost efficient and just efficient in all of your processes, because every dime, I mean, it always counts, but even more so when that dime is a significant portion of your bottom line. Um, as you work with a 3PL, you could take advantage of those efficiencies. Um, Specifically, I think with both efficiencies in the rates and the volume that they're able to process. Um, so I think if you have low cart items, you, uh, it's probably helpful to have a lower SKU quantity that moves faster. This allows a 3PL to give you essentially the most cost-efficient service, and it's something that's the most efficiently to process. Um, Also, if you have like low uh, cart values, but you have heavy items, a way that 3PL can help you gain those efficiencies is by ensuring that the product is stored closer to your end customer.
Hmm.
That is a major cost difference. And in an example, if you're shipping from LA to New York and you are shipping toilet paper, it'll be extremely expensive versus if you were doing that from LA to LA, or if you had any like diapers or anything that's volume item, that probably not that expensive. Um, yeah, but that's the way I would approach that thought process.
Good. Yeah, no, and I think that that's one of those situations where it's always going to be a little bit different. But I think that through a combination of what ShipStation offers and then what ShipBob offers, it's kind of a one-off conversation every time. ShipStation gives some great
Yeah.
access to insights and reporting so that you can look at, where do you have density, and then the folks over at ShipBob are glad to talk about how that affects the cost on their side. And I think kind of feeding into that question is, can you talk a little bit about where do you guys have warehouses in the U.S.?
Yeah, so we have a little bit of a unique take on the industry, but our facilities are in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Dallas. And our facilities are
So like the really cheap real estate, yeah.
yeah, yeah, we're in the west loop of Chicago, like pretty close to the Google building. This is about as expensive as you get for warehousing space.
Right.
Part of that is that we're closer to your end customer, and we're able to get products quicker to there. So we're looking at that vision of 4 to 5 years out and the same day delivery aspect. But that's our network, and we can achieve great coverage with 2 day, next day, and same day with these facilities.
Awesome. Excellent. So this question's come up in a few different formats, so we'll just kind of ask it in a broad sense. Let's say that I have a large, broad catalog. I've got a ton of SKUs, and each one of them has pretty low order volume. Does a 3PL make sense for me? And if it doesn't, what's really the cutoff in terms of the number of SKUs in relation to the number of orders per SKU, when I should really start to look at a 3PL?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish I had the magic answer that's there for it. But there's probably like a ratio that you can look at, and depending on like the unit economics, if you start like this happens with apparel all the time. If you have high value like items, it would be different than if you were selling like pretty inexpensive socks or something of that sort. But essentially, if what you want to have is a ratio of 10 to 1. That means that you have 10 orders to every SKU that you have on hand. So if you had like 1,000 SKUs, you probably, if you have 10,000 orders per month, that would be a ratio that makes sense. Again, that it could be as close as a 2 to 1 depending on what the product is, but typically when I think about apparel, you're looking for a 10 to 1 ratio.
Okay. And so I mean, it sounds like really what that comes down to is just inventory forecasting and just kind of understanding the day to day and the season to season of my business.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is a lot of times like what we see with entrepreneurs that have like really high SKU counts is that there's an 80-20 rule where 20% of their SKUs make up 80% of their orders.
Yep.
So maybe it doesn't make sense to have a fulfillment provider hold all of those different SKUs, but those fast-moving SKUs would make a ton of sense. So that's something to play into that equation as well.
Yeah, no, and that's actually a really good point, and that's something that ShipStation has put a lot of work into lately. Is just the ability to kind of split things up to where maybe I can look at these orders and I can say, in the example that you just gave, I sell apparel and accessories, and so maybe I know that I do a ton of blue jeans, but then once every 30 orders I sell a belt. So maybe I want to fulfill that belt from my home or my local brick and mortar retail, but I want to outsource the blue jeans to you guys. That's something that now we're able to offer in ShipStation. So I think that there is a great fit for that. That's a great point about breaking orders up. So as a merchant, when I'm just kind of walking into my first relationship with a 3PL, how do I start to communicate kind of what my priorities are, my expectations, and then as time goes on and that relationship matures, how do I make sure that I'm getting a sound return? How do I make sure that the quality's there?
Yeah, so my belief in this is that you want to do this like as much of it as you can upfront, and I delve pretty deep into all the different like things to consider. But the more you could put as transparent as you can be of where your business is and where you plan to grow, the easier it is, I think, for any outsource party to help you understand like what the fit is at that time and how that scales. But in general, is you're starting out, typically like the life cycle is you start out with a couple of products that scales. You get to a point where you start to have a bigger portion of your business go into B2B and omni-channel, and you're now selling on Amazon and wherever else you might be. Just ensuring that third-party logistics provider is set up to have that scale there, because there's companies like ourselves and others that are set up to do that. And understanding kind of the volume of the implications can help you understand how that grows. But that's a great question. I think it's really important because the worst thing that you could do is put a ton of inventory somewhere and realize that's not the right place and move it somewhere else.
Right.
And stop your business for like a week or however long it takes to do that. So you want to make sure that you vet as much of that as possible up front. Is essentially like you're entering into a partnership. That's the way we look at our relationship. Just as our partnership has been with ShipStation, and you guys are like fantastic. That's the way we think about any other client that comes into their partner, and I'm sure that the way that you guys perceive it. So as transparent as you could be in that upfront, the better you're served long term.
Right. Sure. Absolutely. So we talked a little bit during the presentation, a little bit during the Q&A, just about, return on investment. That's a huge portion of this. So one of the things that's really going to factor into that is just the cost of postage. How can a 3PL help merchants with, the cost of shipping?
Yeah. So if you look at just postage, I would say ShipStation does a fantastic job, but in having an integrated provider there with the tech with that. But essentially, if you were a provider that has greater volume of their processing, there's economies of scale there.
Yep.
So if the 3PL themselves is doing greater volume, there's probably greater opportunity to take advantage of that. And as the business scales, there's also opportunity to improve that postage pricing, because you're making up a bigger chunk of that negotiating power.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think it really comes down to the economy of scale. So okay, great. Let's see here. Let me go through the questions that we've gotten in while we were talking. Okay, so can a 3PL, and I think that we talked about this briefly during the slides earlier, but can a 3PL handle my bulk wholesale orders out to my retailers?
Yeah, so most definitely. At ShipBob, that's something that we do, and I think most modern 3PLs have a piece of that. Like I mentioned there, the modern 3PL is built for e-commerce for fulfillment, but yeah, for the most part, what you want to like explore is essentially the wholesale orders that are going to the Nordstroms and Urban Outfitters and such. They go through an EDI, which is an electronic data interface, which is simply making sure that the way that Nordstrom's or whoever is receiving this product gets it into their standards, so that it ingests properly into their logistics system. So exploring with the provider if they've done such orders, who like what are like the wholesale places they send stuff to. But the simple answer is yes. A fulfillment provider should be able to handle both the B2B and the e-commerce.
Okay, great. And so let's see. So it's Q3 right now. We're just kind of rolling into the Q3. Everybody's getting ready for Q4 and Christmas season and peak. So
I feel like Jan 1, you start the countdown to Q4.
Yeah. It's not even Jan 1. It's December 26th. Yeah, it's time to get going again. It's nuts. But so how does, we all know how that affects us as a merchant. But as far as a 3PL, how do you guys handle capacity in the fourth quarter?
Yeah. So I can't speak for every party out there, but the way that we look at it is we start to do forecasting and planning for this literally like in January. So we're already thinking like I think we're pretty close right now to sending like guides to all our merchants that they can help them prepare more for Q4 as well as help us prepare for like what the different volume they're expecting. It typically goes in waves. So there's a receiving wave that happens with an inventory ingestion towards the end of Q3, early Q4, and then that inventory is all getting fulfilled out, or a lot of it towards the end. So it requires a lot of labor planning and moving pieces, but the way that we take that is literally from Gen 1 onward, it's all about thinking of how are we ready for Q4, and that involves things like operating a third shift, prepping labor and things of that nature. As well as prepping, also, I think it's important to know is the carriers, because now the carriers that are delivering these shipments need to come with bigger vehicles or come more often, and that all of that happens typically is all finalized by the end of Q3, if not earlier. But yeah, I guess from the merchant's perspective, you should be thinking about that now of when your inventory is landing and exploring what lead times or if any a 3PL might have.
Right. No, that makes sense. So we've gotten a few questions around reporting and just what kind of information can I get back from ShipBob, and then how do I port that data into something like a Salesforce or a Zoho CRM type thing. So do you what kind of advice can you give us around that? Just the reports, the information that we can learn when we start working with ShipBob.
Yeah, great question, and thank you for that. We have our tech is something that's we're really proud of, but essentially in our dashboard, which is our like central interface, you can download in Excel format a bunch of these reports that are related to your clients, to the shipments, to your inventory, and then play with that as you see fit, as well as we have some kind of advanced reporting features already built in that can help you understand how you should distribute your inventory and what per SKU level and where that inventory is currently sitting right now in terms of specifically to the footprint of our fulfillment centers. It's pretty robust, and I think it's really helpful to make some of these decisions about reorder points, where should you send your inventory, when should you send that inventory. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then this is a question that I think it's a really interesting question. I'm not quite sure that it fits into ShipBob's wheelhouse, but we had talked a little bit about cross docking and the difference between a warehouse and a fulfillment center. So I just want to run through this question and just make sure that see if there's something that you can offer a little bit more here. So let's see. Sarah asks us. I'm not quite sure that I'm ready for a 3PL across the board, but I do have distributors in place for my product throughout the US, Canada. One of the problems that she's running into is manufacturers can't send directly to the distribution center because the customs form that's on the packaging is going to reveal the manufacturer. Is there a solution for example, a company that I could just have all these orders sent to, who would then remove the customs and manufacturer paperwork and then forward on to the distribution centers?
Yeah, so I think that's so I like for a 3PL, I don't think 3PLs are specifically built for that function, but I'm confident there's companies out there that can help with that. But it's closer kind of like the cross-docking piece where you're essentially you're sending inventory. You want to make sure that inventory gets received like at the first point that it enters a facility. That is the facility that should be inspecting the inventory. So if you're a manufacturer, any type of errors or send inventory short, the first point that touches it is the one to make sure that the inventory is perfect. So there's facilities that are I think more towards that cross-dock or B2B space that specifically focus on that. and they could provide the service of receiving the inventory, and then I guess repackage it and move it on as need be.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. And actually, Sarah, we'll share our contact information right after we get done with the questions. And I actually, the more I think about that question, there's actually another partner of ours that I can refer you to that's specifically what they deal with is cross dock. That's kind of what they live and breathe. So I'll be glad to talk to you after this. Kind of in that same vein of international shipments. So that was kind of things coming into the U.S. But as far as things going out of the U.S., how does international fulfillment work when I'm working with a 3PL?
Yeah, so there's a couple of pieces. One is the way it's set up in ShipBob is with the tech is that you want to make sure that you have the right codes labeled to each product, so that's um, the paperwork is essentially electronically filled out, and that's all like hands off. You don't want to be filling out like manually customs forms, which, believe it or not, some 3PLs still do that till this day. But setting up the digital footprint to ensure that that's all compliant, and then simply there's a ton of different service options that can help you deliver your product anywhere in the world. And it's just then at that point of how quickly do you want it there, and what kind of like tracking, like how well do you want to track that product based on those services.
Okay. Okay. Great. And then last question. I know that we've only got a couple of minutes left. In fact, we're already a few minutes over. Last question is seller fulfilled Prime. So most of us sell on Amazon at one degree or another. A lot of us get involved with the Prime program. Is seller fulfilled Prime something that we're able to outsource to a 3PL?
So yeah, there are 3PLs that are compliant for it. It's not something that ShipBob currently supports. We support fulfilled by merchant,
Okay.
but yeah, that's something that you can look, and then you just want to weigh your costs versus having FBA versus FBM versus seller fulfilled Prime. But yeah, there's solutions out there for that.
Okay, awesome. Great. Thank you.
Not
Thanks
sure
for
how
the
cost
thanks for the
effective
information there.
side note, but yeah,
Yeah.
just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I mean there's always the right fit out there somewhere. There's always somebody for everyone, I guess. All right, great. So I think that kind of wraps us up. We'll be following this webinar up with just kind of a recorded version of everything that we've talked about today, as well as a blog post on the ShipStation blog that was written by the guys over at ShipBob, and that just kind of covers how 3PL impacts your ability to offer 2-day shipping in an affordable way. So, it kind of goes back to that last question about seller fulfilled Prime. It's maybe I don't want to do seller fulfilled Prime, but I want to offer the same level of service as Prime, and so that's where ShipBob can really jump in and start to help out. Let's actually advance one slide, and that'll take it over to the contact information for both myself and Jivco. Looks like we went one slide too far. Let's bump back. There we go. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us anytime. Josh at ShipStation.com or Jivco at ShipBob.com. We're glad to jump in and really kind of help out any way we can. Thank you guys for your time, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye bye.